neither am I. Hello, everybody. It's an indeterminate day for a special edition of the Bad Dog Book Club. I'm the cat that's playing as the otter is away, to torture an old phrase, Toonces, and I'm here with Sparf, who's joining us.
Hello.
He's filling in for an emergency session of the book club. Skip is away at the Rocky Mountain Fur Con right now. So over the weekend we had made plans with another fur to record a show for this, but technical difficulties kind of got in the way at the last second. So we've had Sparf here as a local fur step in for a helping hand at the last second. You might remember he read the which story did you read? You forgot already.
Yes. Oh dear.
It was just about 2 stories ago, wasn't it? It
Yeah,
wasn't the last one, because the last one was Alex Vance, I believe, wasn't it?
I think so. I can with technology determine this, but it was it was $40,000. No.
$40,000.
No. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of Antho Dreams. Mm-hmm. That's great.
You did a wonderful job. I remember that much.
Crossing my podcasts up. $40,000. It was. And then there was the Kitsune one. That wasn't this one. And then there was the werewolf one. And the Moon Outside. That's what it was
called.
And
the Moon Outside. That's what it was. Cube Triangle story.
Yes,
that's a good one.
Yes.
If it was more pornographic, I might have been able to remember it more easily. But we've got like a semi-pornographic story this week too. All's Well That Ends, which is a very cheery title for a rather cheery story. And, well, before we get to the story, you said you wanted to talk about, you got to meet somebody at a convention recently.
Yeah, a couple of weeks back, there was a small sci-fi con in, Hunt Valley, Maryland. It's just north of Baltimore. And Christopher Judge was one of the guests.
But he mentioned fursuits at some point, hadn't he?
Yeah, Christopher Judge. If you look him up on YouTube, just look up Christopher Judge furries. You'll find him on a panel at some big convention with the cast of Stargate, being told what furries are, or at least what people tend to describe furries as. His reaction is really priceless. And when I found out he was going to be there, I got in touch with the con staff. I paid for a photo op with him, and I contacted the con staff and I said, "Are you guys cool with costumes? Is there going to be a problem?"
Costumes is a very loaded phrase here.
Yes, costumes being
a very proper term.
Yes,
and
being a good ambassador to the fandom is important, kids. And I sent a photo of myself in my pretty green fursuit, and the staff responded back, says, "No, that's no problem. A mascot looks like it would be a lot of fun."
A mascot. I like that term even better.
Yeah, that is a great term. Amateur mascot performance. But she said, yes, as long as there's no nudity or lewd, as we are a family-friendly con. I was like, well, that's absolutely fine by me. So the day comes, and I suit up and go to the photo op room and get my photo taken with Christopher Judge, which, for those of you who don't know him by name, this is the gentleman from Stargate SG-1 who played Teal'c, the very stoic, very, very Michael Dorn Klingon sort of character. But,
I remember him.
Yeah, with the gold thing on his head, and
clearly I remember him.
And he got a kick out of it. In fact, when I went through the autograph line the next day to sign it, he recognized the picture, because obviously I was the only one who had done something like this at the con, and he looked up and said, "Oh, it's you," because I wasn't wearing the suit. I said, "Yeah, that's me." He's like, Great. He's like, "Who do you want it signed to?" And I told him, and of his own accord, I didn't actually prompt him on this, he wrote "Furries Forever" as part of the autograph personalization, so I was really pleased with that. So that's how responsible furries interact with celebrities, as opposed to fursuiters humping Will Wheaton's leg.
And you know what I think what happened here, and what I think is starting to happen more and more with people, is that they're starting to engage with the outsider image of furries that I don't think a lot of people chose to take on when they started getting into this. Maybe came into it more reluctantly. Mm-hmm. But in certain contexts, that image is actually very, very preferable to people, especially younger people who are in like college age that want to be rebellious and have some kind of distinct image. I posted a journal recently. I think it's more or less just saying I think the hipsters are starting to run out the nerds.
God, I hope not.
For me, it's like seeing like two loved ones fighting. It's like no, please, children.
Well, it's you know I'm not officially a gray muzzle.
And you're not a hipster either. I'll say that.
Yeah,
clearly.
No, yeah, you can look at me and tell. But I've kind of grown into a position in the fandom where the fandom is to me something more than rebellion and more that it's not for that anymore. And it never really was for me. I had my share of gateway drugs, Robin Hood and Balto and the Lion King, and there's one every 3 or 4 years. There's a furry gateway drug, to borrow Fuzz's phrase, I think it is. And yeah, but it's kind of a great creative outlet, which we can have things like your guys' podcast that I get to be on. Yay.
But that's what I think is causing this is like the actual social structures that this fandom is being built on, like the Fur Affinity, the website, stuff like that are more or less built just to facilitate people meeting and talking to each other, when before it would have seemed much more difficult. Do you think that's having an effect on who has more access to the fandom and who can join up? Because I think it is having an effect of pushing it more toward the mainstream, just because it's getting latched onto these more mainstream.
Well, I will say that you're seeing the stuff in Hot Topic now, the furry sort of leggings and arm sleeves that are like one step down from an actual fursuit.
Really?
Yeah, I was on the Metro a month or two ago, and there was a guy. It was actually a couple of months back because it was on the day of Pride, the Pride Parade, and he was wearing like these striped furry leggings and arms, and he had ears on. And he was a young guy, and I wasn't going to be like that creepy dude that comes like, "Are you a furry?" Because we don't need any more crazy creeper images.
Certainly don't.
No. So, but I was watching, and
the story does not help that image, by the way. That's what I was going to say. If we're going to talk about that now, I may as well just say the story does not help the crazy creeper image at all. We have a mysterious line sneaking into a hospital
with an underage cancer patient. That is trouble. I mean, at least while he's underage, I will say this. At least while he is technically underage, because he'd be, I think the story said, a junior in high school. At least it's an adolescent who is well aware of sexuality. It's not like the very small children, which that's a whole different can of worms, as FA found out several months back.
Yeah, thanks. Alert Pay. I actually want to extend my personal thanks to Alert Pay in that regard. But I still think it's funny though, just because it's such a very vulnerable image, of course, to put at the center of a story. And what I didn't get is why it was made an erotic story, because I thought the two things just did not blend to me, because we've featured stories on here before that obsess with death, essentially, like the entire story more or less is a rumination on that, but I don't think we've had any that kind of tied the two with eroticism so much, and it did not leave a good taste in my mouth like toothpaste and orange juice.
Oh, thanks for that image. Yeah, I will say that about the story, is that really the eroticism almost seemed totally superfluous, and it was written in a way like as if I'm just going to keep stealing phrases from famous podcasters because I can, and if they hear this, they'll know who they are, and your listeners probably know who I'm stealing this from. But if they're just going to Control F cock in the document, then and look for that, and it's well put together. It serves its function as erotic material. It's well written in that respect. But as far as a plot point, given the sort of hopelessness that you see at the beginning with Aaron the fox being
It's pretty
cancer
explicit
patient.
too. It's like, no, you're dying.
Yeah, it's like he knows he's
You're
dying.
dying.
He's gonna die, and him dealing with that. And I almost wanted when the lion showed up. There could be an erotic thing there, but I didn't necessarily want to see it right off the bat. I thought maybe if it had grown into that, it would have the pacing would have been.
I was hoping for like fevered dreams or something like that. I mean, it's not as if like eroticism in the vague concept is necessarily barred from any kind of story, but I just thought it was very awkwardly handled where he reads the story and for some reason reading the story triggers some magical event where the protagonist from the story magically comes into his room. And I thought, okay, it seems like the best counter argument to some advice I remember hearing at a furry convention one time, which they said something like gravity is green and everybody knows that, where if you want these surreal things or these scientific these sci-fi concepts just to be accepted, you just present them as if they are and just accept them. That's kind of, it seems like almost like that's what they were going for here, what Alflor was going for here, and it just fell completely flat. I think about the only real substantiation that was done to really verify this is a real thing. We just want you readers to understand that. He says like, "No, touch me. Don't I feel real?" It's like, is that all the more we're gonna get for this? But it's a short story, so maybe they can't invest that much time into it.
Yeah, I think with the threads, the emotional threads that kind of get presented, this might have been better as a longer work. There's certainly, I mean, I found a lot of really great grains of things that sort of maybe were a little harvested prematurely or cut off a little prematurely. I will say that in reading it, I was starting to say this earlier. In reading it, I really wanted the lion to be
more supportive,
more
maybe?
more of a guide. The one thing I did like that is, and maybe this is kind of talking out of both sides of my mouth, but about Arj the lion is that toward the end.
Oh, sorry about that.
Toward the end, he it turns out that he really is being kind of selfish, which, you kind of expect these magical beings to be in a story like this. You kind of expect them to be benevolent, and when they say it's your time, but you can come with me, then that's the truth. But he's got just a little bit of the other mother thing from Coraline going on, where it's like, oh, all is well, I have you now. Except that he's not really malevolent. He's lonely,
well,
and that was a nice kernel. I think should have been drawn out a little more.
What they make explicit late in the story when in the final meeting, when even the parents are there and they think they see Arj, but anyway, oh shit, I lost my train of thought. Skip's gonna have to cut this out.
Can't even find the station, huh?
No. What they were trying to do explicitly at the end was what they were trying to do kind of a bit more subtly in the beginning, which is to put Aaron in the place of Prince Friss in the story, because, I mean, Arj comes in and saves Prince Friss, and Prince Friss is not just in any kind of particular nefarious circumstance, but he's, like, held down and restrained, kind of in a way that Aaron similarly is, and I feel like, I can't remember any specific examples right now, but there are a couple times where they're mirrored there so that you can see that there's kind of a similarity there. But then, like, Prince first dies at the end, and then they just want Aaron to replace him, and it just seems kind of like a very awkward way to tie up that little narrative there. I mean...
Yeah, from the beginning, the story sets up that the disease is incurable, and yes, it's obviously cancer from the chemotherapy treatments and whatever, and cancer can go into remission, and you can have, you can be that close to giving up and then come back from it. I don't want I don't want to say that that's not realistic at all. That's not what I mean. But there's...
Story doesn't reinforce that sense, not at all.
The story sort of...
Not until, like, the very end. At the very end, it gives you hope. Like, once he comes out to his parents, like, oh, maybe I can live now.
Yeah, it seemed to draw a correlation there that I don't think is justified.
It toys with your emotions, essentially. There's something to be said for a story that can take you on a well-guided kind of tour through a wide range of feelings and emotions, but this one just kind of jerks you back and forth like a broken amusement ride. I mean, you start out the story and it's hopeless, he's going to die, and then, oh cool, he has a book, that's good for him. And then, oh wow, there's this guy who's making his life apparently, wonderful, he's feeling so much better, and okay, great. Now he's come out to his parents, he can live again. But oh, wait, no, now he has to die again. Except now that guy's bad. We actually really know he's an asshole. He wasn't as good as he thought he was. And then in the end he's alive or something.
Well, it's not... And I'm grateful for this. I really did appreciate that Alflor tried something different, because this story has a lot in common in a couple places. Once the lion shows up, it has a little bit in common with a story called An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, and that's an old story. I feel like an idiot right now. I forget who wrote it. It's about this guy who has been caught by Union troops during the Civil War trying to sabotage a railroad bridge, and they take him out on the bridge and they're going to hang him, and the rope breaks, and he manages to get away, and he's thinking about home, and he's thinking about this, and he's running and hiding and running and running, and as he gets to the gate of his plantation, there it is, completely unharmed, just as he'd left it, and he gets there and he sees his wife on the porch, and he runs to her, and then the story does this abrupt snap where all of a sudden he felt something sharp jerk backwards on his neck, and then the narrative cuts to Peyton Farquhar was dead. His body hung limply swinging from a rope at the end of Owl Creek Bridge. And the whole thing had happened in that moment before death, and that's kind of where I thought the story was going with the lion, because I figured, okay, they did something like this on the TV series Bones. I think it may have been Bones. It may have been it was a medical show or an investigation show of some kind. I remember that there was the character who had died in either the previous season or 2 seasons back was standing there and talking to one of the characters, and she would have conversations with him, and it was like he was a ghost, and she really was believing he was a ghost, and it turned out she had a brain tumor, and that was what was causing it.
Yeah, so that's how I felt too, and I actually thought at the end it was going to build to that we were going to be revealing this as some kind of final dementia of the death pangs or something like that, and it was like a really anticlimactic when it turned out that I think the definition of anticlimactic when the father says, "I think I saw him," and it's it was actually really hit me. Like the only part of the story that really hit me emotionally was when he was on the phone with his parents, and he's saying the line from the book is here, "I think I have to die." Mm-hmm. I mean, because to me, I was reading it again as in like, okay, so we're confirming that these were, I guess, apparently, finally now, images in his head, and then also again, apparently now they weren't, like 3 paragraphs later.
Yeah, the parents playing along, if in fact like he was not there, and that's what's unclear to me. But if in fact he wasn't there, the parents playing along with him strikes me as a little strange, but because of and I mentioned this to you before the podcast, my grandmother had a mild dementia when she was alive. She was mostly functional. She didn't have Alzheimer's disease, and she didn't forget things very often, but occasionally things would happen where Dad and I would come home, and she would look up at him and say, "Well, I'd like you both to meet," and she would turn, and she was, "Well, no, where did he go?" And there had never been anybody there, and the doctors had told my dad that he needed to bring her back to reality, that to help her to be able to focus and stay. So I guess having never been through an extended cancer treatment with a family member, my father had prostate cancer, but it was operable, and there was no chemotherapy or radiation involved, and so I don't really know if the treatments have changed for that in the last 15 years since my grandmother passed away. So that kind of stuff, and if they did see him, they're awfully nonchalant about it.
Yeah, it's really not surprising at all, because you were going over the specific situations. Either he's not there and they're indulging their dying son for some crazy reason, I don't know, or two, he is there and there's this strange lion in their dying child's room.
Mm-hmm.
And neither of these things makes very much sense. I really feel as if, like, what you're right, if this story were a shirt, it just fit too tight. This needs to be expanded a bit. I mean, it's not as if, like, these themes do not belong together. It's not as if they couldn't possibly be told. It just seems such a very awkward way to cram it into such a short space. And in that space have such a large number of it devoted to pulp. Which I think just gives the mistaken impression that this is just a wank piece. And I think clearly this is not intended to be a wank piece.
Yeah, and I think the prose itself flows very nicely.
Yeah, Alflor wrote one of my favorite stories we've written. I mean, we've read on this podcast so far. We know Alflor can write. This story just didn't turn out well.
Yeah, I've actually checked out a little of his stuff online because he posts to Twitter, and I follow him. He posts when he posts a new chapter of this work in progress. He's posting on SoFurry, and which, as a side note, I really hope that their interface is drastically improved with this SoFurry 2.0.
Did you check out the new one? Did you see the beta?
I only had time to glance at it. Like,
don't just look at it. It's really good. The whole thing is really nice.
Well, as long as I don't have to use their own built-in strange editing thing to enter my stories, if I can just take a story and upload the file, I'll be happy. Like, 'cause I wasn't that down on the interface as it was. I mean, it wasn't the best. It was kind of cluttered, but I could navigate it okay. But when I would go to submit stories I had a few things I wanted to submit, I'm like, oh, so I have to open my file, copy, paste it, make sure I set the line spacing back to normal, and then it was inconvenient. But anyway, so having read other stuff by him, like, I really enjoy his work. And this one, I think, just maybe needs a little more love and care, like, as far as fleshing it out. And he may or may not, want to spend any time doing that. Like, it may just be...
I think it's already published.
Oh, it is?
I think it's published. I don't know. I should have checked. Damn. But I think he's finished with this story as it is.
Well,
There you go. It's unfortunate, though. This is I think the first episode of the podcast where Skip's gonna yell at us because Skip doesn't like it when I say mean things. And I don't want to be mean. I just didn't like it. We could try, like, being very hurtful, if that might be more cathartic. Because that's what I operate under sometimes. You just say that it hurts the worst, and then later on, it'll be like having dipped your burning hand in ice cold water. Sure, it hurts at first, but then.
Well, I don't go so far as to say that I dislike the story. I just think that there were some issues with it that I thought could be addressed just with a length thing. And it may very well be, if it's been published, that it was cut to length.
Somebody might have butchered this. I don't know.
It may have been cut, because I found my story from the Fernal Equinox con book this year. There was a chunk of information and sort of character development that was up front that was I had edited several times to make sure that I wasn't just info dumping on people, and basically it came down to working the character's actions into sort of showing you what kind of person he was, and that he was a scientist, that he worked in a laboratory, and he believed firmly in science. Mm-hmm. And then is going out into the middle of the woods on the night of a full moon to do this ritual in order to see his dead lover again. Mm-hmm. And this is completely out of character, and so there's for him to do this, and so I had to do a lot of editing to make it fit space requirements for the con book. They needed me to cut, and I took a fine scalpel and extracted everything I could and made it fit. But if you're having to cut for space, sometimes that will throw the pacing off in ways that you may not see. Like rereading it would.
On the other side of the coin, it might not have been cut for space. Maybe there's also a possibility he just didn't write out enough. And I think something writers underrate sometimes is oftentimes, if you want to develop certain things you're going to have to give a certain amount of space to them. That means having X thousand number of words and committing yourself to writing them. I actually kind of restrain myself sometimes to writing just short stories because I know I couldn't really write anything that much longer and sustain it.
Mm-hmm.
If I did, it would be a much more daunting project.
I've been working on notes for something that right now is looking to be roughly novella length. To tell the story I want to tell, and it may end up becoming novel length, but I'm not sure that the story goes that far. Like, I'm not sure that there's enough to make a full novel, even a short one.
Most of the stories I read just got like 4,000 or 5,000 words. That's it. And I try to make it up. I try to keep the concept itself pared down and simple enough that it can, be expressed in 4,000 to 5,000 words. And one thing I try to do is I try to make it so that the sexuality is in and of itself the story, because I think human sexuality is such a dynamic and broad sphere that you don't have to attach it to other things to make it compelling or intriguing. Like, you don't have to be pairing up two other characters for some external reason to make their meeting relevant.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that there are some good examples of that in several issues of Heat, where they're written to display the sexuality front and center, and that is the actual impetus of any plot. There's writing like that. That
isn't there conflict and drama in human sexuality just naturally?
I would say yes, much of the time.
Much of the time?
Well, I don't like to use absolutes.
I think we soften over the conflict enough times, but it's such a pretty emotionally charged human activity in and of itself. I think you can write books that are just about fucking, like you can write books that are just about war. Because, they're pretty dynamic and, intriguing human concepts in and of themselves. They have their own standards and...
Yeah, there's a prime example of that in Catch-22. That's a war novel that is about war in a specific point of view.
Or even the Texas-Israeli War 1999, of which I'm about 10 chapters in. I got this as a gift from a friend over my birthday, Dos Kuhn, for Affinity, and I guess this book's been advertised in different places, and the entire concept of this book is that, okay, in 1992, some terrorists put LSD in Britain's water supply, which caused their prime minister to launch nuclear weapons at, okay, get this coalition, Ireland, China, South Africa. So now they were then going against the British, and then it caused a global thermonuclear war, through which the only surviving country was Israel, who prospered into a world superpower, who then had to invade Texas, who have seceded from the United States. This entire book is nothing but, more or less, them describing tanks moving in this direction and shooting over there. That's the entire book, and the thing that I get about this, I'm making fun of this book a lot because I clearly dislike it, but somebody liked this. This was right up someone's alley.
Yeah, well, there is. This is. Let me see. I've actually seen this imprint before.
Science fiction in the grand tradition.
Ballantine. Yeah, that's an imprint that at one time, it looks like when that was written, published a lot of third tier science fiction and a lot of I think they actually published a lot of westerns.
Nobody does
and
westerns
romance.
anymore.
No, and really, I think it's because it was kind of mined out. But now when you bring it back, you can do things that are really interesting. You can really play with old conventions because everybody still knows the conventions, but you can play with them. Like, as bad a movie as it probably is, and I love Daniel Craig and I love Harrison Ford, but Cowboys versus Aliens,
I want to see that.
I haven't seen it yet, and I want to see it because I want to see if they actually play with Western conventions. If you look back at, trying to think, less recent but more recent than the old spaghetti westerns or the Fistful of Dollars or things like that. If you look at Tombstone or you look at some of those that were early '90s, or Young Guns, they really played with the genre. I don't know how we got onto that topic.
But maybe that's our cue to wrap it up for the week.
Maybe so. Good grief.
Thanks again for joining us for this emergency session. You're a lifesaver.
I'm glad to help out.
Excellent conversation too, and thanks for teaching me all these things. I mean, I'm supposed to be the neophyte, the person who is a little bit more new to it and a little bit kind of ignorant because I'm very oblivious, very passive. And so thanks for telling me all this cool stuff today.
Yeah, anytime. I had a good time.
Alflor, thanks for letting us use your story. We're sorry that I didn't like it as much, but everybody should still check out Alflor's story. He's really good.
Yeah, absolutely. Check him out. Check him out on SoFurry, and I think he has an FA as well. His stuff is there's one thing I will say about it universally, that I've not read a story by him that was harsh on the reader to read. It wasn't. I've not read anything that was flat emotionally, and that's something that I regard as really important. That I meant to get to earlier, and that was that I've read some things. Just be real quick with this, but I've read some things in the past, published things that were so hard to get through. In fact, my mind is going right now to a Star Wars novel. Because when I was in high school, I went to the library, and they always kept a lot of them on hand, and I read things like the Jedi Search trilogy, and then what I refer to as the Holy Trinity of Star Wars books, the Heir to the Empire trilogy by Timothy Zahn. And then this new book came out, and it was called The New Rebellion. And I picked it up. It was on the new release section, and I read through it, and I'm going, these are characters I have known for years, and I do not care about one of them. You could not. Han Solo could be ignited right now by a grenade, and I would not shed a tear for this.
It's pretty bad.
The author had also no concept of the universe in which she was writing. This is one of about 10 Star Wars novels that is so bad it has been declared non-canon.
By who? Who's the authority on this?
Lucasfilm. Everything that happens in the Star Wars novels is considered canon unless they look at it.
Are we really trusting George Lucas on this? Did George Lucas make George Lucas canon?
As much as we could have a whole podcast. In fact, there is one. It's called Unsheathed, where they talk about the storytelling problems in the new trilogy. They're still considered canon. Those events do happen. The only solace I take is that, according to someone at Lucasfilm, Jar Jar Binks was on Alderaan when it blew up in episode 4. So, at least there is that.
And always a happy ending.
That was the happy ending.
As much as I like this podcast, I think we should, maybe go back and add a Chewbacca roaring in the background or something. Just put that in the background every 5 minutes or so, just so we know Chewbacca's chilling with us.
You should.
Thanks for joining us, Sparf. Thanks for joining us, Chewbacca. See you later, everybody.
All right.